Hello and welcome to our video study through the book of Romans. I'm excited to get into it. I hope you are as well. This is an incredible book, all centered around the gospel of Jesus Christ. So today specifically we're going to be focusing on chapter 1. But before we get to that, let's get into some background concerning this amazing book of the Bible. So interestingly enough, this book is written to a group, the church that was there in the city of Rome, capital of the Roman Empire. But Paul, interestingly enough, by this point that he was writing this letter, had never actually been to Rome. More than likely, when he was writing this letter, he was in the city of Corinth, as is described in Acts chapter 20, on his third missionary journey. He'd heard about a group of believers there in the city of Rome, and so he decided to write this letter to them to deal with particular issues that they were having. Though he had never actually visited them, he did mention, though, in chapter 1, in the beginning of this letter, about his desire to come and be with them and preach to them. In fact, in verse 15 of chapter 1, he said, "I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome." And he's eager to preach the gospel to them. Why? Because he goes on to tell us that I am not ashamed of the gospel, he says, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. So Paul says, I'm eager to come and preach the gospel to you. Why? Because the gospel is the power of God for salvation. And why? Because in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. This verse right here, Romans 1 verses 16 and 17, is the key verse of the entire book of Romans. It's our memory verse for chapter 1, but it's the key verse of the entire book of Romans because Paul is completely focused upon preaching the gospel and making sure that these believers in Rome have a fuller understanding of this gospel which they have believed in. Interestingly enough, Paul tells us here that it is important to preach the gospel. He gives us kind of at the last part of chapter 1, Romans chapter 1, the reasons why it is important to preach the gospel. Most notably, as it says in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So it is necessary in the first place to proclaim and to preach the gospel because of the unrighteousness of men, which has caused God's wrath to come into the world. So men stand condemned before an almighty God. Something must be done. That's where the gospel comes in, as Paul says. I got to come in, I've got to preach the gospel because men have rejected God, which has led to his wrath, which has been revealed. We see that all throughout the Bible that God says, those who live in sin stand in condemnation before him. But then in the next few verses, Paul, and he likes to do this, Paul answers an objection that he expects his readers will probably have to this last statement that he just made. Without hearing that objection, he kind of anticipates what's going on in people's minds and answers their objections before they even have an opportunity to make them, before they even have an opportunity to state their objection. And the objection that people would make to hearing this statement, that God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness, and all men who suppress the truth. The natural, logical objection that would come up, and still does come up among some in our world today, is how can God rightfully punish those who don't know about his righteous standard? Yeah, they've violated his righteous standard because they don't know anything about him. They don't know that he created them and that he expects them to live a righteous and holy lifestyle. How can he justly condemn these people? Paul, anticipating that this would be the objection running through many people's minds, goes on to answer this in verse 19. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. How has he shown it to them? Verse 20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So essentially, Paul is saying, look, they may not know all the specific details about God, but just from looking at creation, just from looking at the world around us, the sky, the trees, the solar system, the planets, the stars, or even going down at a smaller level and looking at tiny creatures maybe like ants, or even smaller things like bacteria, just looking at this entire universe around us, you should be able to realize at least that there is a creator. And if this creator, this God, this all-powerful being created me, that he has some sort of expectations for how I'm supposed to live. There's some sort of expectation on the part of this creator for how his creation should be. This is a sentiment that's also echoed for us over in Psalm 19, where the Bible says, the psalm writer said, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." We can look around us at the sky. We can look around us at the world that God has created and see there is a creator. So Paul says, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. But what people have done, instead of acknowledging their creator and choosing to try and worship their creator, is people, Paul says, have instead rejected that creator. As he goes on to describe in verse 21, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So they decided to turn away from God specifically. He said, claim to be wise, but instead they became fools. They exchanged or traded out the glory of the immortal God for worshiping images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or creeping things. Instead of worshiping the Creator, Paul says, we have chosen to worship his creation, and sometimes even worshiping ourselves. For this reason, Paul says, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. So God, in an effort to offer up free will to mankind, to provide that choice, God did not just come in and cut us off right there and stop people from continuing on in sin. He wanted to allow us the opportunity to see the natural consequences of those decisions. And so men began this downward spiral. Sin corrupted our hearts, and then we began this downward spiral where he says men and women began to exchange natural passions and natural relationships for unnatural passions and unnatural relationships. And then they continue to be filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, and malice, Paul says. He goes on, starting in verse 29, they are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but to give approval to those who practice them. I would say for myself, hopefully you would agree as well, that of all the things on that list, I don't think I want any of those things to be said true of me. Those are not good things. But this is what humanity has become after we have rejected God and turned to our sin and turned to worshiping other things. This is what humanity has become, Paul says. And this is exactly the reason why Paul says he has come to preach the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation to rescue us from this downward spiral of sin. And even before we jump into the rest of the book, because we're just focused on chapter 1 today, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Even before we begin to look at the rest of the book of Romans, Paul is already establishing some groundwork here, that the gospel is the power of God for salvation, and that it is completely based upon faith. Notice what he said there. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. It is not based upon what you can do. Your works are not going to be good enough to save you from this downward spiral of sin. It is completely based upon faith. The righteousness of God has been revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, The righteous shall live by faith. What an incredible book we are getting into to study. And we're just in the first chapter. We're already seeing how the power of God works to rescue us from a downward spiral in sin that has corrupted our world. I hope and pray that something from this video today was a blessing to you. I hope that we can all learn to apply these truths to our lives, to place our faith in the power of God and the power of the gospel, rather than trying to work our way out of this mess that we've gotten ourselves into. And I hope and pray that as you continue to seek after God, you will be blessed and you will find true joy. Thank you, and God bless.